that can be really difficult too, actually navigating those early stages in a new leadership role and holding on to who you are and what your values are and what you want to achieve is incredibly difficult, I think. And again, though that is a particular time when you need that additional support to help you stay on track and to be the leader you want to be. Because, I mean, the challenges at that point, I think, can be incredibly difficult. You know you're being scrutinized. You know everybody's kind of listening out to know, well, what are you going to do? How are you going to handle that?
Hello and welcome. And today I'm joined by leadership coach Annabel Smith. We'll be talking leadership do's and don'ts, organizational culture, lessons in putting people first, and other leadership insights from Annabel's experiences during both her previous 30-year career as a teacher and in more recent years as a leadership coach, working with people on their work, their careers, their approach to leading. This conversation goes deep into some of the big topics of leadership. It's not one you want to miss. And if you want to learn more about Annabel or I, do listen to the end for more info, links, etc.
Welcome to the Leading with Integrity podcast. Leadership talk for the modern manager. With your host, David Hatch.
Annabel, welcome to the show. It's lovely to have you here and looking forward to another conversation. We're going to record this one. I feel like we've missed loads already that we didn't record last time, but never mind. Make the best of it.
Really nice to be here, David. Yeah. No, that's all gone forever. We'll never get that back.
Yeah. I mean, parts of it are in my memory for however long that'll last. I don't know, but yeah. So let's kick off then with over to you. Tell us a bit about yourself, your career so far, what you do today, and why you do it.
All right. Okay. I'm a veteran 30-year teacher, I guess. That's, in a sense, the bulk of how I've spent my time. And super happy teacher. Had a really interesting career, I think, in that I managed to kind of keep doing new things and went overseas a couple of times, which was really eye-opening and different. So I worked, I was what they call a 2-year wonder. So I worked in East Africa for a couple of years, many years ago now. But I also worked in the US quite a long time. And I had a career that started out being a very conventional history teacher. And then I developed a whole kind of approach to global education. So I did a lot of work in a way teaching young people things that they weren't being taught by anybody else. And that was really brilliant. I mean, I absolutely loved it. That all went well until I sort of ended up becoming one of those teachers who have burnout. And 30 years is a long time to be in one career, I guess. The world changed, around me. Certainly didn't feel I could go on being the teacher I wanted to be, really. It was time for something else. And that was really interesting because I really had, I would have described myself as cut me in half. And like a stick of rock, I would have had, I'm a teacher. And I did lots of things. I did lots of kind of various types of leadership and kind of director roles and pioneering programs and building programs and, all sorts of really exciting things. But they'd all been in that one world with, a few little bit of overlap with other worlds. And actually the thing that helped me decide what next was my sister, who had been a senior NHS leader for many years and was coming up for retirement. And I think it might be fair to say that a number of us who knew her were bracing ourselves for how this would go from being like a very, very full-on career to retirement. And in a way, what was amazing was that she transitioned beautifully to a PhD in Asian art. And she did that because she had had a coach who had been working with her, who'd helped to work out what could be the thing that she did that helped her remain purposeful, feel like, someone she loved, be really challenged. And it was amazing. So in a way, that was really my first association with coaching. I'd never met it in the education world. And so then I started to explore, and then I started looking into how I might train, and I found what I thought was a really good fit training organization, which was very experiential, which had been a core part of my teaching. And yeah, I trained, qualified, got accredited, and was really clear, I think pretty much from the beginning, what I wanted to do was work with people around their work. Because my experience of my career had been pretty spectacular highs, but the lows could be really, really low too. And I was just really fascinated about how I could be the same person, and yet I could be more successful than I would have believed possible some parts of my career, and kind of broken also.
Yeah, it's interesting how those two ends of the spectrum, I guess, often go together in jobs, don't they? I know people who just have that kind of happy medium and just never get bothered. Like, it seems to work for people. I don't know if I could do that.
No, it's really interesting, I think. And the thing I would say is that I was very much, everybody has their own experience, but I was not alone in particularly in the lows, that I felt as if I was surrounded by other people who were getting very, very hurt, actually. And clearly that wasn't anybody's intention, but also I'm not sure there was real skill in knowing how to prevent or mend.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine it's a tough. Is it an industry? I suppose it's a sector, isn't it? It's kind of public sector, isn't it? But it's a tough place to be, especially as a teacher. I mean, we hear a lot about how undervalued teachers are all the time, and I think there's a reason we hear that, because it's probably true, isn't it? But yeah.
Yeah. And I think it is because, in a sense, everything I do really is based around people. And it's true everywhere. We're all people in every sector, in every industry. But I think, within teaching and to some extent, medicine, and there are other fields, but we are very, very exposed. We are really putting ourselves forward. We're giving of ourselves. We are, I think really good teachers, are, they have personalities. There's something you can connect with as a young person. You can't do that unless you're feeling confident. You can't do that unless you're, you've got some energy. You know that you can walk into the classroom and you know what you're going to do. You know that whatever you're going to meet during the day, which could be anything, that you're ready. You've got the energy. You've got the capacity. You're not going to, lose your temper or say something. You've got to feel that when you walk in there, you're ready, because it is, it's the cliche. It's a bit like being an actor. You're on stage, and now more than ever, you are being scrutinized, you're being judged, and it is easy to, to do something which people don't like. So I think it's always been true, but, when I look back at my career, all I see are people. It's all about the people. It's all about the people who are who are your leaders, the people who are your colleagues. And for me, it was all about the young people who I spent my days with. I missed them, actually. That's one thing, I do. They were a really good source of education for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and so something else you've said that I'd like to pick up on about not having any like prior exposure to coaching. So to me, thinking back to my time as a pupil, however many years ago that was, the teachers that always stuck out to me were the ones, as you say, the ones with personality, who they're memorable people. And you remember them and what they were like and how, their passion that came through. I mean, there's one in particular sticks out in my memory who was a history teacher as well, funnily enough. I think that's an easy subject to get passionate about personally. But so in terms of the most effective teachers, the ones that you pick up what they're teaching quicker, I think, and you appreciate them more in terms of what they're trying to achieve. I think the best ones are the ones who take that sort of coaching approach anyway. It's leading with questions. There's different ways of doing that. There are always the ones who just put you on the spot and picked on people, and that wasn't a fun experience. But the other way of doing it, which I now understand in adult life to be more of a coaching style approach, I always thought were the better teachers. So I wonder if maybe you were doing it the whole time, you didn't realise.
I think I was, and I think I was really lucky because my PGC teacher training and my first school were very much about independent learning. So, it was very much it's not about you as a teacher being front and center. It's about you being kind of more like, the conductor of the orchestra. So, you're absolutely there. You can explain something. You can, answer questions. You can kind of keep it moving so that some people don't dominate the conversation. But, and I think, that isn't always an approach that works in every context, but to basically make it about other people in the room, not about you. The other side of that is that I think I'm quite a good storyteller. So, I think that's also, a way of connecting, I guess. So you're trying to find the ways to connect to the different people in the room. And in a way with coaching, it can take quite a long time for people to know what it is that it would be helpful to talk about or what they need to talk about. They don't always know, and they don't always, or maybe they know and they don't really want to go there. So, I think, I absolutely agree. I think that listening, I always kind of laugh because when I was training, I was nicknamed the Queen of Silence. And usually when I'm saying that, I'm saying it in a great long thing where I'm talking all the time. And I have to point out that when I'm coaching, I actually don't talk a lot. And I think that's something I did learn in teaching, that, people operate differently. And for some people, it takes longer just to have heard the question, to process the question, to come up with an idea. And so that confidence or that calm means you're not cutting everything off before people have had the chance to do it. But yeah, definitely a connection. I agree.
Yeah. I mean, you're right. Of course, everyone is different. Everyone learns differently as well. Tying leadership and the world of education together a little bit, it's always sort of struck me that in most of our lives, the first real sort of person we look at and see as a leader is probably going to be a teacher, isn't it? Outside of parents and the family. And I think that's an interesting dynamic too, because we almost, especially that sort of formative age where concepts are new to you generally. And if you're thinking about leadership at the time, you probably aren't, but it might be like a subconscious view of it that gets formed based on the sort of teachers you had. And maybe that says a lot about the world of work these days and the way certain managers choose to behave. Tells us a lot about some of the teachers they maybe had in their youth.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do you think that's a fair comparison or not?
That idea of being a role model as a teacher is so powerful. And the thing is that you're a role model whether you want to be or not. It's not when you're like on show. It's all the time. I can remember being kind of realizing for the first time that, everything you wear, everything, like they're watching, and I think in a way you have to be you. You cannot have a kind of fake persona, because you're a person of interest. You're a significant person in people's lives. So of course they're watching. It is important. And I think it's things like being able to say you don't know, being able to say you might have been wrong about something, being able to say, it's been a heck of a week. Should we just watch a film? A terribly educational film. But, actually, sometimes I think it's really good. I can remember one school I worked at where I had a really lovely group of sixth formers, and they kind of were like, would you just sit down, Miss Smith? You look really tired and we're worried about you. And I thought, oh gosh, now I'm actually role modeling really badly that I've allowed myself to get, exhausted. So yeah, I do think that role model piece is huge.
Yeah, I try not to draw too many comparisons where we make out employees are children.
Yeah, 100%.
However, what you said there about they are watching and they do see you is so true for any manager or business owner as well. And I think it's exactly the same logic. Like this whole sort of one rule for me and another for everyone else, it just doesn't work. If you're not following, if you're not role modeling, if you're not leading by example, if you think you can just do something different or wrong and get away with it because you're in charge or whatever, like people notice, they know. Like if you're not truthful with them as well, they pick up on it. People are way smarter than we give them credit for sometimes.
Absolutely. And I think the other thing about leadership is, don't forget what it used to feel like. And I think that's something where, because the kind of nature of the job changes so profoundly, the thing that you spent all your life doing is something you probably never do. You're no longer in that world. You're in a totally different world. And I think one of the things that so often happens is that if teachers become leaders and then forget, and that's one of the things that often causes, I think, people to kind of lose trust. Good people lead with themselves, but if you're leading with yourself, you're putting yourself above the parapet, and you're risking. And I think that the biggest step up that happens when you are a leader is that you're much more likely to be alone in what you're doing. And if you're alone in what you're doing, we know that that increases your personal experience of that as a risk. Once you step up, it's a cliche about leading being lonely, but, there are all kinds of considerations. Some are about confidentiality. Some are, that you don't want to expose yourself to, people perhaps used to be your friends and then you've kind of got a promotion. And to me, that is the power of coaching, because if you have a coach, you never have to be alone in anything. But, I think specifically in leadership, because the stakes are so high potentially, you're dealing with people, you're dealing with unpredictable people who have really complicated lives. We all have families, we all have fears, we have, health, we have the dog, we have whatever it is. And, it's been one of the most interesting, I've worked in a lot of different schools, and one of the most interesting moments is seeing how an institution and leaders respond to somebody who suffers a bereavement, somebody who, has a life crisis, it's sometimes an ongoing situation, and how they deal with that. I totally lost trust in an organization that I was working for after my mum died. And I absolutely walked away saying, anytime anybody needs me to do anything for them in the weeks following a bereavement, I'm there. Because when you've been through that, it's totally different for different people, but there is something particular about that time. And I think really putting the human piece into that, it's game changing. You're so grateful if somebody recognizes you're not a lazy person, you're not trying to skip work. You are, in fact, being human. And let your people be human. Trust them to be human seems to me like a really powerful leadership thing.
I agree. And I think it's just the right thing to do as well, which
Absolutely.
always adds to the case, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's integrity. And, the thing I would add to that. So my master's was in human rights. And the first lecture I went to was by Professor Conagirty, who was the head of the Human Rights Center where I was studying. And he said, the definition of human rights is dignity. And I remember very well, I walked out, pushing my sleeves up, going, oh, that's rubbish. Clearly it's about justice. But it's been so interesting for me. So I've spent a lot of time in other countries, which has been incredibly lucky and incredible privilege with people who are very different from me in lots and lots of different ways. And now I really believe it. It's about dignity. And what I see often and have seen through my career in schools, if you don't treat people with dignity, they'll never forgive you. And dignity means, yes, you need that time, for example, after a bereavement, where you're not just actually going to burst into tears in front of the children because you can't help it, and you need to have the dignity to be allowed to show up in a classroom, being able to do the work you can do, and do it well. And so for me, leadership in education is 100% about see your people, support your people, and see your people like for who they are and who you hired them to be, and let them do that and be that, and grow and, and model education. We believe in education. We believe in letting people develop and grow. So, yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. Not just in the world of education, I think any form of leadership, I think it's got to be all about that. And
Absolutely.
and obviously the bereavement is like the extreme case, isn't it? And I think, I don't know, I was going to say I think the majority of leaders are pretty okay about that, but that's probably not true. I don't know. I have no data to make that assumption, but I feel like...
I think the only way you know how it is that someone is to ask.
True.
And, it's very often not the top leaders, so it's kind of middle leaders, it may be, and I think, I'm not aware of any sort of staff training, if you like, which is around thinking about that aspect of leading. And, my absolute total pet hate is human resources. The words. I mean, there can be wonderful human resources departments, but the idea that we are human resources, just to, and I think it is that idea of be confident enough to say, how are you doing? What do you need? And if somebody says, actually, I need another week, that's fine. Because when they come back, they'll be ready. But, I think you have to do that without making people feel guilty or like they're letting other people down. And I think that's one of the things in teaching, that you're very, very aware that you could potentially be adding to the burdens of your colleagues.
Yeah, it's a funny one. I mean, you're right. I don't think I've ever seen training either. I think at most there's like a sentence or two in a staff handbook or something like that about what you're entitled to if you suffer a bereavement and how close you have to be to the person in order to qualify for the leave and all that sort of horrid rubbish, as though whether they're your immediate family or not dictates your relationship, which is a pretty risky assumption, I think. It's on the basis that everyone's family is the same, isn't it? Which is very much not the case.
Yeah.
But anyway, going off topic a bit there, but I think it is difficult. I think the bereavement one, as I say, is the extreme case. I think where a lot of managers and bosses go off the rails more frequently, presumably because it happens more often than a bereavement, I guess, but is things like sick leave and taking holiday entitlements and that sort of thing.
Absolutely.
And your point about people feeling like they're going to be a burden, I think the irony of that is they're more likely to actually be a burden if they're forced to be at work when they're going through these things, whether it is a bereavement or a sickness or, I wanted to be on holiday and the boss said no, a week's notice or something, that sort of thing. They're going to be way more of a burden, whether through just like genuinely being sad and the effect that has on other humans when they see it. I mean, it's a natural response, isn't it? That's not going to go well in the workplace, I don't think. If they're sick, obviously, like the sickness might spread and then more people are sick, and so your productivity drops then. And then at the other end, if you've denied their holiday entitlement for whatever reason, they're probably going to be quite annoyed about that. And when people are annoyed, they tend to complain. And that's not going to have a good effect on your culture either. So to me, it's always been a no-brainer. Like, I don't know. You hear these tired old cliches like, well, we've got to think about the bottom line, and the work still needs to get done, David. Even if you're sick or whatever, what are you going to do to make sure we don't fall behind? These horrid things when you think about what they're actually saying in that situation. Terrible things. Like, you would never say that outside of the workplace. Like, if you're talking to a friend, down the pub or at a social gathering or something, and they say, oh yeah, my mum passed recently and really struggling to get on at work because of it. And you're not going to say to your friend, well, work's got to get done. So if you can't do it, what are you going to do about it? Like, it's horrible, horrible things to say.
And that's, this I think is, if you work with a coach, I tend to think of that being like Friday afternoons. I don't know why, but I do work with several leaders who, it's a Friday afternoon slot. It's the kind of end of the week. Mm-hmm. And, you can bring that and you can say, I now realize that what I said, I wish I hadn't said that. I wish I hadn't, and then you can say, okay, so what would you like to have said? Okay, well then what would you like to do? What would make you feel better? We all say things and do things sometimes and then walk away and think, oh, I shouldn't have done that. That wasn't what I meant to do. That wasn't the impression I meant. That isn't the kind of leader I want to be. That's fine, but you don't always know what to do. And I think what happens very often if you feel out of your depth or like you made a mistake is that you double down. because it feels too difficult to do anything else. It might take too long. It might be you don't know what to do. And what I find very often with the coaching is that if I'm working with somebody in that kind of role, they can say, I wish I had, I regret, I should have. And it's not too late, and I think because that sense of feeling a bit ashamed of something you've done or knowing you're not doing something well or wishing you could do it differently, but you don't know how. Well, there's such human emotions. We all do it, all the time. And if you can have a mechanism for stepping away, looking at it from a bit of a distance with somebody who can listen and kind of, ask a question, and you can actually come away saying, okay, you know what? I am going to send them a note next week. You've got to know people that you work with. So one of the things I think is absolutely don't be distant.
Yeah, I think so. And that to me, again, like that is leadership, isn't it? Is having that courage, that confidence, I suppose, but that ability to admit when you've done something, maybe not right or wrong, but maybe that you're not happy with.
Yeah.
But I think where it gets tied up in this sort of, I think it's an issue in wider society about the way that we conflate admitting you were wrong or unhappy with something with weakness. And we've seen it at a national political level for quite some years now, not just in this country. But it's almost like this pathological inability to say, do you know what? I got that wrong. I'm sorry. This is what I'll do instead next time. This is how I'm going to fix it this time. That sort of conversation. I can't remember the last time that happened. I mean, maybe there has been a recent one in the UK,
well,
actually.
The sorry thing, isn't there? Where
you
kind of go, which is probably
although
worse.
That's been co-opted by the internet for different purposes now and is actually quite entertaining. But yes, I know what you mean.
Yeah. Schools are interesting because we sort of are more aware with young people, like that pat on the back, that boost. We know that it can make a difference. But we're the same when we get older. To have that kind word that, that was really great, that kind of note, whatever it is. And the other piece, I think, Gallup do a global leadership report every year. And this year their focus was, they were asking people, I think it's 55 countries around the world, like a huge sample of people. And they were talking about leadership in every way. And they were asking people what they wanted from their leaders. And miles ahead from all the other answers was hope, which was really interesting. I think that is not hope that things will, you'll be top of the league tables and super successful. I think it's the idea that what you're doing is worth it, is going somewhere, that your efforts, you're above and beyond, to feel that all of that you've given of yourself, we're putting ourselves out there and saying we care. Yes, and so I think part of that hope is like to be seen, that yes, you were right to do that. It's worth it. It works. That's who we want you to be. We want you to be those extra people. And it has to make sense. So you have at the end of the year to be told, yeah, you're amazing. We see what you did. We're so glad you did what you did. We're hearing what you did. Young people who you teach are telling us what you did. Their parents are telling us what you did, what your department did, what your faculty did, what your whatever. And then you think, yeah, everything I'm doing is going somewhere. It's moving us forward. I'm doing the right thing.
It's difficult, isn't it? I think it's one of those areas where it's fair to say people don't go into that career for the money, do they? They probably don't get into it for any other reason than they care about it. It's about the kids. It's about the people. I think probably the same could be said of the NHS and healthcare, at least in this country.
Yeah.
And then somewhere along the line, what happens is, because they are like that, they care that much, they're doing that much extra work and extra time that they probably shouldn't be doing. But if they didn't, the whole thing would probably fall down around us, wouldn't it? They burn out, and it's not dealt with properly. And so, and you mentioned burnout earlier as well, didn't you? So, and then what happens is, if burnout isn't dealt with, if they're not given the time to properly recover from it, it becomes this kind of repeating cycle, and then you end up in this bitterness place, and then suddenly you've got disgruntled workers who aren't trying their hardest, and all that effort's been withdrawn, or at least it's not producing the same results anymore. And it's, I mean, in the private sector, I mean, you see that mostly in smaller businesses, startups, especially startups, because they tend to be tied to a more sort of purposeful thing, or a more specified thing. Like, I joined this company to do this, as opposed to I just wanted a job. And you see similar things. And again, I don't know. In my experience, I think in the private sector, it's a bit more intentionally taken advantage of than perhaps it might be in education or NHS, at least at like the management level, if not at the national level. And it's, I don't know, I mean, burnout is really only something we've been hearing about in the last, 2 or 3 years even. It's always been there, I think. Maybe it had a different name. I don't know. Stress.
Yeah. And I think, there's often quite a lot of hurt in it, I think, that you've not been seen. People don't realize how hard you've tried, how much you've maybe given up or risked. I think there can often be a real sense of injustice, that you're not lazy, you're not useless, you're not, you're very often not getting the help, early on that would have prevented all of this. And I think, one of the things that sits kind of at the base of almost everybody's relationship with work is that, that need to align your personal values, your sense of who you are, and your sense of purpose. And actually, once you kind of dig down, if you're not kind of proud of the organization you work for, you don't actually feel comfortable with what they do, and you don't really like who you are at work, and you're not really quite sure why you're doing what you're doing, except that you have to keep doing it because you need the money. Those are really corrosive, fundamental things. And, and I think until you can kind of get at that and start working on it, it's incredibly hard. And I think, I hear this, so not everybody I work with is in education. I'm thinking of somebody I've been working with who was super happy. And then the organization she worked for was taken over by another larger company. And of course, it's all going to be exactly the same. But of course, the values were actually different. And now it is incredibly difficult for her to feel comfortable at work.
Yeah, and the sad thing is, a lot of times when that happens, it's intentional, because they want rid of those people who were there before the buyout. And it's the only way they can get away with it without getting sued or whatever.
And it's a bit of a cliche in teaching, but, very often it is the good people who go. It's the one who go the extra mile. It's the ones who really care. I mean, if I had a fiver for every teacher I've heard say, I just need to care less. I never thought about this during my, the vast majority of my career. Absolutely loved it. But, when things are really hard, I always used to think that like the happiest time of the week was Saturday afternoon. Like you just about got over the week, you done whatever you need to do on a Saturday morning. You got that kind of, you knew that nothing was going to happen tomorrow. And then, Sunday morning, nearly always you'd be doing work. Sunday evening, you've got the, Sunday scaries. And, the summer holidays, these kind of summer holidays that mean that, all teachers are fine because they've got these long holidays. You get just a little bit at the end of July. And then beginning of August is already Sunday morning. And the end of August is Sunday evening. And, it shapes everything. If you are happy at work, if you are, comfortable, they sound like weak words, but actually you don't have to be super successful. You don't have to be massively confident. You just have to be looking forward to Monday and, kind of confident that it's going to kind of stay within that kind of range that is, yeah, I can deal with that. Something difficult will happen, something unexpected will happen, it'll be fine. When you start on a regular basis, kind of going into there's a yellow zone and then there's a red zone. If you start living in the red zone, you can't for long.
No, indeed. It's, I think for me, it was always do you get a good night's sleep? Like, apart from the fact that is quite restorative in a lot of ways, particularly for burnout and stress and things like that. But also, like, if you can't sleep, why is that? And if it's work, you need to do something about that. It's not healthy.
Yeah. And I think we're kind of too nice. We're too ready to sacrifice ourselves. The number of people and across sectors, like, I lie awake at night, my heart is, beating, spiraling, everything is monsters in the middle of the night. It's work. I work with quite a lot of humanitarian workers, for a lot of them, that work is, it is really serious stuff. It is, but it has to be possible to do it and live your life. And that is a leader's job, to set it up so that is possible, so that your people are not actually living in the red zone, so that they're not getting hurt. There's a great economic argument. You're going to retain them. They're going to give you 110%. They're going to tell everybody they love working where they work.
So we've talked a lot, I think, about where leaders go wrong in various industries. We've talked about the importance of quite a lot of key concepts like integrity and avoiding burnout and treating people like people, because they are, hence the name. With all of that in mind, and from your career so far, what would you say is your best memory of being led?
So 2 things come to mind. One where I was an employee and I was allowed to do some crazy projects. And so I was building kind of community projects, and I was taking the young people who I was teaching, and we were going into the community during the school day, and it wasn't like community service, it was actually a lesson. So I was in America at this point, and the headmaster said to me one thing: if they're ever late for football practice, I'm going to shut you down. And it was what he didn't say. And he was joking with me, really. He was like, I think what he meant, and I did clarify, was, off you go. give it a go, see if it works. Let's try this. Let's experiment. You've come to me with an idea. Okay, let's try it. And I was kind of like, what, really? Actually, okay. And I think giving people the opportunity to be creative, to try something, it's a very contained risk. It's very carefully planned, but actually, yeah, I trust you to have a go. Try that. In that place, I also went on to create a whole new department that had never been in the school before. And in fact, that turned into a whole new kind of physical space and, part of the school. I had no intention of doing that when I went there. But I felt that I was trusted, that I was encouraged, that they were like, okay, come on then, and how you're seen and how you're made to feel, I think. And I was also thinking of actually another school where I wasn't a full-time employee, but I used to go out every year and do a lot of work through my holidays. And the whole place, and many years, so I came to know it well. I mean, some people, the staff got to know me, but a lot of the students didn't. Walk across campus and everyone would say hello. And everybody would have a chat. That feeling that you're welcome, you're seen, you're interesting, even if you're a stranger, even if you're not staying, that's something very non-accidental. Creating a culture where people feel seen, they feel liked, they feel welcomed. And that's been a big part of the work I've done in schools, working with schools where not everybody does feel welcome. There's a kind of sense of, kind of hosts and visitors, it's like, well, this is kind of our school and you can be here. And I think that that's true in a lot of organizations, that, that not everybody feels welcome. There's a whole initiative around bring your whole self to work. Can you be you at work? Can you show people what you'd really like them to know about you? Can you actually say what you're going to do at the weekend? Or do you feel like it might just be invitations of somebody to say something kind of scathing or, belittle you a little bit? So I think the leaders that I really think of are the people who have invested in building a culture which creates opportunities and encourages opportunities. And I think probably, I was quite lucky, I think. I'm not sure whether everybody who was, working there at the same time I would have felt the same. But I do think that knowing that you work in a place where you can go to the top, I'm not talking about enormous institutions, but a pretty top, even if it's not the very top, and say, can I talk to you about something? That seems to me like a leadership success. And not, you need to know that so-and-so is horrible, but actually something kind of, professional and constructive. And I mean, that's huge. That's huge, because that's the leader most leaders want to be. Most people start out saying, I want to be approachable, my door is always open. And then very, very quickly that gets lost, which circles back to this idea that you need to be seen, you need to be present in whatever way is viable, depending on the size of the section you're leading or the institution you're leading. But you need to be a real person and you need to be human. I mean, something I say quite often actually to people, you're allowed to be human. Makes me think of the best advice I ever heard, which wasn't given to me. But when my father died, my mother was with him at the hospital, and he'd been brought in an ambulance. And she told me that she just said to the nurse, I don't know what to feel. And the nurse said, whatever you feel is right. And that was such useful advice, because I often work with people who feel that somehow what they feel is wrong, that they shouldn't be feeling like a failure, or they shouldn't be unhappy at work. They shouldn't want to do something else. They shouldn't. And, don't should on yourself. It's what you feel is right. You may want to stop feeling it. And that may be the work that we'll do together to help you find how you're going to stop feeling that negative thing. But you're a human being. Whatever you're feeling in that situation is right. It's what a human being feels in that situation. And just because you're a leader doesn't mean that you get a different kind of upgraded human being kit. You're just a human being, and you've got the same stuff to work with. And if you're feeling rubbish at the end of the week, okay, then the only question is, what do you need to stop feeling like that?
Yeah, it's one of those things that I think a lot of leaders struggle with as well. It reminded me of a leader I worked for once who used to get very frustrated when people expressed emotions. His buzz phrase used to be like, I just wish we could take the emotion out of it. And you're like, okay, I sort of see where you're coming from, but also by our nature, no, we can't. Like, this is how humans work. And I don't know if it's just he didn't want to deal with it, or he couldn't, or maybe he was coming at it more from like a data-driven decision-making objectivity sort of point of view. That's probably what it was, thinking back to now. But it just wasn't helpful in the moment to hear that when everyone in the room had a specific issue and they were feeling a certain way about it, and they'd expressed that to their leader, and that was the response. Yeah. And I get why people struggle with it, because it's difficult. It feels confrontational sometimes. It's messy. It's things that we don't, as also ironically as humans, like to deal with when others are having these things called emotions. Yeah. But equally, like, if you've accepted a role as a leader, you've got to also accept a big part of that is exactly that, dealing with other people's emotions.
And use your power. What needs to happen for that to be okay? So Nancy Klein, absolutely phenomenal, I think, influence on a lot of coaches and organizational psychologists. For example, she has a protocol where you run a meeting and you just have a way of doing it. And it feels a bit clunky the first couple of times, but then that's just what you do. And what you do is you simply go around the table and everybody gets to talk for however many minutes. And nobody interrupts. And nobody asks any questions. That's just that. Everybody gets to say their thing. Maybe it doesn't work in every but it's just one, there are ways to not just to kind of squash, but actually to okay, so what's the best way to manage this so that the emotion is productive? Because there's something good in there. There is somebody cares enough to feel strongly enough, that something is being done wrong, or something could be done better, or that people are not being treated well, or whatever it is. So there's something very valuable there. How do you get at it? Another cliche. But to me, leadership is about the difficult conversations. Everything else you can delegate.
Yeah, well, that's a perspective. Yeah.
I mean, that's nice conversations, and that's great.
Yeah.
But, so often the things that will have been eating away during the week are, I've got to talk to so-and-so. I did talk to so-and-so, and I know I didn't do it well. I know they wanted to say something and I didn't let them, whatever. And it's not just feedback. There are other difficult conversations that have to be had. And I mean, there's so little support around that. I have to say, few things are as divisive as HR. Yes, sometimes people come in and they're so skillful.
Yeah, I think it's a very corporate concept, isn't it? And I can see why in like a big, huge company, it's a necessary thing. But why it is suddenly not suddenly, is it? But why it is now a thing in these tiny companies of like 10 or 15 people. I mean, anything less than 100, it feels unnecessary to me. And there's that misunderstanding around what it is as well, who it's for, what it does.
And they need to be part of things. That's the biggest thing, I think. Schools, just to take that example, they're hugely hierarchical. And they're also then there are these other people who are there, but not really there. There's finance, there's HR, then there are the people who work there every day, but they don't actually teach. So there could be, all the people who maintain the buildings and the grounds, all the people who are, all of those other roles can be hugely hierarchical. Boy, does that tell you a lot if you walk into a school or any organization and, leaders of various levels are equally comfortably chatting with employees of every level. It's so telling. I think HR should be, if you've got to have it, people, whatever it is you're going to call them, they should be right in the middle. They should be part of everything. They should know exactly what everybody does every day. Then you should know them. They should know you because they have so much influence. But I'm not an expert on this, so.
No, me neither. Having experienced a few of them over the years, though, I think, the main function tends to become by default because it's the only thing that most leaders don't want to have to know or learn about is like the arbiter or the expert on employment law in the room who gives like the semi-legal advice even though they're not legally trained, which is in itself, I think, a little bit problematic, isn't it? There's so many more things that they could be doing. I agree with the name and your issue with that. I don't think they should be called HR. I think that's partly why everyone abbreviates it and says HR, because the full phrase is a bit distasteful, isn't it? I quite like the ones who describe themselves as like people representatives or like head of people, chief of staff even, maybe. Like, sort of okay, but I don't know. I feel like the main thing they end up spending all their time on is the one thing I think should be outsourced to a solicitor.
Yeah.
And then you're left with what else are they for? I don't know.
And that's such a worst case scenario. Yeah. It should never come to that.
Yeah, I do think like part of your management leadership training, once you get above maybe a certain level, should include this is what employment law is. This is what you can and cannot do by law. Because if you don't know that and you have to ask someone every time, it's a bit time consuming, isn't it? If nothing else.
That shouldn't be part of a healthy workplace culture,
I agree.
You should be tuned into those early warning systems. If you can't listen and hear what you're being told by all the verbal and non-verbal indicators that you're getting, again, that's so important. What are you doing about the fact that people don't feel happy? What are you doing about the fact that people are getting out the minute they can at the end of the day? And that's a creative problem-solving challenge. And that seems to me to be, really interesting, but it is one of those things that can go to the bottom of the to-do list.
Yeah, you've reminded me, actually. I was a little bit unfair about HR people just then, because there's another thing that they quite often end up doing, isn't there, is having all of those difficult conversations that other leaders don't want to face.
Yeah.
And I don't envy them that either.
No, you could say it shouldn't get that bad. That's what you want, isn't it? You want that organization where the early warning signs are picked up. It is a place where you can say, I don't think this is going well. And maybe I'm being a bit optimistic, but the stakes are so high. And when then you start factoring how much these things cost, even if you take the kind of human cost out, paying people to not be at work, having to rehire people, retrain them, it would be so much easier if you didn't have to do all of that. And a lot of that comes down to being able to hear negative feedback.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think, as we've said all the way through, though, humans are imperfect, and the unexpected will always happen, ironically. And to be fair, I've met some excellent HR people over the years. I mean, several of them have been on this podcast, in fact. And I a massive respect for them. I worked with one as well, like one of my bestest friends in the company at the time was the HR manager. Like, I can say that and it's true, but it's also separate from the fact that I'm not sure whether HR as a concept should exist or not.
I think it's an incredibly difficult
job. It very much is, but I also feel like the most important parts of it shouldn't be their responsibility anyway. That should be the job of leaders.
Yeah.
Whether it is like having those difficult conversations or looking after people or making sure that productivity is where it needs to be even, and that problems get addressed in a prompt and legal fashion, whatever they may be. That, to me, isn't the sort of thing that should be delegated or given to another department. That's the leader's job to me. I mean, that's the way I've always seen it.
Yeah.
Whether I'm right or wrong, I don't know, but yeah.
It's one of the things you have to think about as a leader, isn't it? What kind of leader are you going to be about that? What's your view on that? And again, that comes back to what feels right to you. Not just, well, that's what I inherited, I'm just going because it's, and that's really difficult too, isn't it? Because nobody starts from a blank slate. Everybody comes in to, a situation that they've inherited. That can be really difficult too, actually navigating those early stages in a new leadership role and holding on to who you are and what your values are and what you want to achieve is incredibly difficult, I think. And again, though that is a particular time when you need that additional support to help you stay on track and to be the leader you want to be. Because, I mean, the challenges at that point, I think, can be incredibly difficult. You're being scrutinized. Everybody's kind of listening out to know, well, what are you going to do? How are you going to handle that? And one of the school leaders I admire the most and have known for 20 plus years now, he's always said, the first thing you have to do is build your team. And that can take time. You can't just kind of get rid of people, but gradually you need to build your team. And you need to build your team from a position of self-awareness. I'm good at this. I'm never going to be good at this. I'm interested in this, but I'm not going to have time to bring the expertise and the level of knowledge that's needed. And but that first thing is the place where quite a lot of people fall down. You've got to be able to say, these are my strengths. These are the things that maybe in a different situation could become my strengths, but I'm not going to be able to do that now. So who do I bring in? Who is the best person I could find to brief me on that, to guide me on that, to advise me on that, and then put those people in place. If you're a fantastic people person, then who is actually going to do the data? Or if you're, genius finance person, then who's, maybe you're not great at the people piece. You've got to, I think the perfect leader is a team. Because nobody can do it in one person. You've got to be able to say, this is what I do. And I've worked with people who clearly see anybody around them as a challenge. Got to not be the Aharaja or the English king who has to kill all his, all the potential rivals. You've got to be that secure leader who says, right, I'm good at this. I now need to find a great person at that. And we just need to work together.
Yeah, I agree with you on the perfect leader, notwithstanding the question I'm going to ask you in a minute. But kind can't remember if we had this conversation or not, whether or not you're a Star Trek fan. Because for me,
like not really is a very bad answer.
No, it's okay. You know, there are other forms of entertainment available. But it's something that comes up quite a lot in this context. And particularly going back to the original Star Trek from the 60s, they had this very interesting dynamic in the leadership of that, in that it was one person, but actually it was three, because it was the kind of the on-paper top leader and then his two closest advisors. And every decision made, there was a conversation between those three, and they each had their strengths. There was the top guy it was Captain Kirk, who obviously he's got like all the stereotypical leadership qualities that people expect to see on TV. Then you had Spock, the very logical, objective presence. And then you had McCoy, who was the empathetic, people first, I'm a doctor, damn it, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
And between the three of them, you know, they didn't always make perfect decisions because it would have been really boring TV if they had. But they did a pretty good job between the three of them. And I don't think any one of them alone could have done that. And it speaks exactly to your point about it's not something that one person can do, because leadership and management as a collective skill set, if you like, have so many different component parts that I think it's impossible to find all of those different characteristics, skills, abilities in one individual. I guess it's not possible, but it's incredibly unlikely.
Yeah, I'm not sure that it is possible, you know, and I think but the enabler, the thing that is required is that you need to be able to say, I can't do all this without help. I can't do it on my own. And that self-awareness of, this is what I'm good at. These are my strengths. And then getting the right people to support you and guide you and advise you. It's incredibly difficult, I think. And you don't necessarily get to choose. You may not actually get your team in place for 5 years.
Yeah.
You know, you may eventually be able to, I mean, you may live in a world where you can get them in by next week, but very often you have to work with what you've got and find the best in that as well. But yeah, I think it's interesting. So having lived and worked in the US for quite a while, the kind of idea of heroes, it's a very complicated concept, I think. They're kind of mythical for a reason. Yes, you can have somebody who is heroic in an exceptional circumstance. But actually, I think a leader who has to show up every day in every way, it's not really the same thing. You know, it's unlikely that you're going to, because kind of most of those heroes would probably be incredibly annoying to work with.
I think, yeah, it's very difficult. We're going to go into this question in a second, but I think you're right. I think the thing with heroes, like when they're historic ones, we only know like the best thing they ever did. We don't, you know, because, and I think part of that is because of the way we are as humans, like as storytellers, and that sort of the verbal tradition, and even the way we record history, or used to record history pre-internet anyway. It's got to be like interesting, exciting, memorable in some way before anyone will bother even taking a note of it. But you're right, like the best leaders in practice in the real world, the best people to work with are the ones who are just consistent. They show up every day, they do the right things, they treat people the right ways. They're not necessarily going and looking for the nearest hill to die on or cavalry charges or whatever it is, depending on where you are in history. And those are, I think, those are the real leaders of the world. They're the ones who make the real meaningful differences. Absolutely. They're not like the PR effect.
No. Kind.
Exactly.
Kind goes an awfully long way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And as for the fictional ones, they're just fun to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, they're all learning, aren't they? They're all kind of teaching us something. They're all making us think. But yeah, I mean, and I suppose in a way that just comes back to like the very simple thing that leadership is really hard.
Yeah, I think it is. I also think, though, that we overcomplicate it. Like, it can be simple without being easy, which is, again, a recurring theme that we have on the podcast, actually. But I think that's where it gets more difficult for a lot of people, is we get these really complex ideas about what it is and how it should work and the way we should behave, and these myths and misconceptions of what leaders look like and all that sort of stuff. I mean, look like literally as well as in terms of how they behave.
Leadership Heroes.
Well, the last question, we're going to skip over the rest because I think we've covered most of them anyway. And it's been a really interesting conversation. Lots of tangents and places I didn't think we'd go, which is always the mark of a great episode in my view. So the last question, though, is the non-optional one that everyone has to answer. So it is, leading very nicely in from our conversation we just had, leadership heroes. So if I put you on the spot and you had to pick that one person, who in your opinion would be a perfect leader, or as close to perfect as a human can be anyway, but it could be anyone you could think of. So,
I think I have a problem with the question.
Yeah, I thought you might. You wouldn't be the first.
There's an example of somebody who is stuck in my mind for 30 years. And if I ever knew, I probably did once know her name. And we were in a children's hospital in South Africa. And it doesn't even really matter what the context was. I knew that what she was doing was what I thought was the hardest job in the world. I couldn't imagine anything that would be harder to show up to do every day. And she was also the warmest, most generous. And I think there was something about that which was an extraordinary person doing the right job. She was in her element. And nothing that she revealed, nothing that I picked up said, it's too much, I don't want to be here. And I think, so I'm very aware I'm totally dodging your question, but I do think it's about being the right person in the right place also. And so if I give the history teacher's answer of, well, you could look at Churchill as a wartime leader and a peacetime leader, but I wouldn't choose Churchill. But he was obviously, and that's the thing, I think, if you're going to talk about leadership heroes, you've got to put an edge on it. Like, you are the person who, you did under fire go and get those people back from that incredibly dangerous place. That was extraordinary leadership. It doesn't mean that you'd be great on Monday morning in the factory, as a leader. So I think, I'm telling you why I don't like the question. Because I think it's too hard. But I have absolutely got snapshots in my head of people who were phenomenal leaders. They were where they needed to be. They were where they could do their best work. And maybe I saw them on a good day. Because I sort of think you don't have to be a hero to be a great leader.
I agree.
Clay feet, 100%. You are allowed to be rubbish sometimes. Not like rubbish that hurts people or, but actually you don't have to have all the answers. So I wouldn't like anybody I worked with to feel that they were trying to get some kind of heroic ideal. They were kind of trying to get to a place which I don't think exists, because I think people who are phenomenal leaders in one context, they probably drive their spouses and partners completely bonkers and, are terrible at other things. So I don't know. What answers do other people give?
Well, it's interesting you mentioned Churchill, because he comes up quite a lot in this question. Yeah, I think so. It's been a while since I've done the data on this, but last time I did it, the top three were Jesus, Captain Picard from Star Trek, and parents or siblings of various people.
Okay. Yeah.
And then Churchill, I think, was fourth or fifth.
Yeah.
Mandela's on there quite a lot as well.
Clay feet. I mean, absolute huge admiration, but also yeah. I mean, the very fact that I think it's incredibly difficult that, kind of number one is difficult to emulate. Role model, yes, but I don't think that's necessarily the goal. The goal is like, who's the leader you want to be? What's the best version of yourself as a leader that you want to get to?
Yeah, I think this question really is like you say, it's about the role model. Who is it that you aspire to be like? Or even like you could answer it from the other direction of just like, who do you think is an interesting leader?
Okay, I'll give you one more example. Many years ago, I worked at a school where there was a deputy head who was a terrifically elegant older lady. And I have to be careful because I have to say this never happened, but I had the feeling that I could have walked into her office and said, Anne, I mean, I want to say, when I tell the story not on a podcast, I say, I've killed one of the children, which is possibly not a good thing. But
you definitely didn't kill any of the children. Let's lead with that.
Something as terrible has happened. And that she would just say, don't worry, dear, you sit down and I'll deal with it. I mean, calm is another, everything will be all right. And I think as a leader, that ability to remain calm, Captain Mainwaring, it's don't panic, but it's really, really important to be able to stay calm, to be able to bring everything down, to be able to stay. And it comes from experience, but it doesn't automatically come from experience. To be able to say, it'll be all right. This too will pass. I have a very old friend who once told me that at the end of an incredibly difficult phase of her life, she had taken a stone and she'd written on, it worked out, didn't it? And then she was basically packing up a life into, cardboard boxes and going into storage. And she put it in there, and it was some time before she unpacked it again. And then she unpacked the stone and she was like, yeah, it did. And it's, I think it's that calm, that long view, you're not the first. We know how to deal with this. It'll be all right. And maybe that's what Churchill did bring. I don't know, that sense of we're in it together, we know what we're doing. We're doing it together. Confidence, we will win. Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
I could go on. I don't know.
I don't know. From what I've read about him, it was very opposite in private. But
yes, that's the thing. And that's the thing. Like you can name a hero. I don't know where it came from, but I remember that quote. The colonel was a peaceful man, except in his domestic life. You've got to take the whole picture,
Yeah. I mean, he's definitely a controversial figure, I think, but he's also from a period of history where that wasn't controversial, and I think it is a difficult one. Like we can admire the good qualities of these historical figures without wishing that they were still here today or that we should be behaving the way they did, which I think is where a lot of people go wrong with Churchill. I think he's too often viewed as like the exemplar of Britishness and how we should all be today. And that couldn't be further from the case, in my opinion.
Take a step back, look at the whole career.
Absolutely.
And look at behind every great man.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Eleanor Roosevelt, nothing like the spotlight of her husband, but extraordinary work. So I think probably heroes for me are the people who, if I say their name, nobody would know who I meant.
That's fair. But I think that's good though, because it's people you've actually met as opposed to someone you've read about, which, while interesting, is not as interesting.
It's like everything, isn't it? Where do they sit on the spectrum?
Indeed. Closing thought there, I say quite a lot that leadership is about understanding the context. And I think the same is true of leaders, isn't it? As you've said, the context they were within, where they excelled, where they didn't, and understanding that full picture, I think is the probably the most considered way of answering this question.
Yeah. And I would also say, like, what help do they get? You can lead. Clearly, people do lead in incredibly complex contexts. But you have to have the support. You have to have and I think that's in many ways, you could argue that the greatest leadership failures are in the setup, not the individual. You've got to be able to be human and have the support to let you do that. You keep trying to stop us, and it's not going to be easy.
It's okay. So, Annabel, thank you so much for your conversation, for your time, for being with us today. Final thing I will ask you, if anyone in the audience would like to know more about you, the work that you do, where can they go to learn more things?
Okay, yeah, that would be great. So I'm on LinkedIn, Annabel Smith, and I have a website, annabelsmithcoaching.org. Have a chat, book a call, because I'm not everybody's cup of tea, but we have what you call a chemistry call. If we get on, then that's the first step to working together. All
right, sounds good. I'll put those links in the show notes so everyone can find that easily. And
fantastic.
Yeah, that's all we have time for.
It's been a pleasure, David.
Likewise. Thank you again so much, and have a great rest of your day, week, month, however long till we speak again.
Okay. Yeah, you too. Okay, bye.
Big thank you to Annabel for that conversation today. Plenty of insights from the work she does today with leaders and professionals, as well as some really interesting experiences shared from her time in the education world all around the globe. So, listener or viewer, if you would like to learn more about Annabel, then, as always, please check those show notes for the links, visit the website, learn more things, and maybe drop her a message or have a chat as well. And if you are new to leadership in whatever form that may take, and you're experiencing challenges like loneliness, imposter feelings, knowledge or skill gaps, perhaps you're struggling with difficult conversations, low confidence, changing relationships with colleagues, or you feel like there's anything else holding you back as a leader, if that sounds like you, then I want to hear from you. You can find me on LinkedIn, drop me a message. My profile link is in the show notes. Or you can visit www.leadingwithintegrity.co.uk. Join my Integrity Leaders community today to build confidence, clarity, and people-first leadership skills in a community that actually understands what you're going through because they're in similar positions. Be more Jedi, be more Starfleet, be the leader you wish you'd had and the one that your team deserves. You will find the sign-up page for the community by clicking that green button on the website I mentioned just now. There is a zero cost tier as well, but don't forget, as a podcast listener, you can also use the discount code, which is also on the screen and in the show notes right now. That code will give you 50% off your paid membership too. Thank you so much for being with us today. Next week, we're entering something of a landmark month for Leading with Integrity and for my business journey as well. The last week of November 2025 will see 2 anniversaries for me, the 6th year of business and the 200th episode of this podcast. And to celebrate, I'm going big. We've got some more brilliant guests, including a corporate spy, a mentalist, a returning favourite guest from last year, and a well-known academic and TEDx speaker. Plus, there will be more besides, but I'm keeping the rest of that as a surprise for now. Watch this space, as they say. More info on all of that next week. I'll see you then, and until then, have a great rest of your week and be a leader, not a boss.